Justice Byawakama Mugenyi Simon, being the returning officer for the nomination of presidential candidates, declare that Kyagulanyi Sentamu Robert, a duly nominated...
Uganda's electoral carnival kicked off last week with presidential nominations, followed by the unveiling of manifestos. Candidates will in the next 50 days traverse every pocket of the country to try and sell their messages to voters. But beyond the sloganeering and empty rhetoric at the pulpit are campaigns based on bread and butter issues or some of the most critical aspects affecting the country.
Government can fail to find money to save our female children, yet they find money for luxury and repression.
So far, only NRM's Yoweri Museveni, NUP's Robert Kyagulanyi and ANT's Mugisha Muntu have unveiled their policy prescriptions to the country's garden variety problems. However, like in other developing countries, plagued by urgent challenges from industrial decay, chronicism, grand-scale corruption, poverty and income inequality, often there are other development challenges. For instance, the wanton destruction and degradation of the environment has dire ramifications, but it's buried in the footnotes of political agendas. This week, as candidates Museveni and Kyagulanyi campaigned in northern Uganda, parts of the region were battered with flooding, with hundreds of families affected. In Elego, Amoro district, which lies at the border with South Sudan, River Unyama, one of the River Nile tributaries, burst its banks, flooding the town, the second time in barely 2 months, destroying countless property and upending cross-border trade. In 2016, parts of Amoro were flagged as a disaster risk zone, with occurrences such as heavy storms, drug-resistant crop pests and diseases, prolonged dry spells and bushfires partly exacerbated by human activity and environmental degradation. According to the disaster risk profiling by the National Emergency Coordination and Operations Center in the Office of the Prime Minister, almost the entire northern Uganda is prone to various climate disasters as a result of human activity. In eastern Uganda, highland areas around Mount Elgon are at risk of mudslides as a result of fragility of the slopes, especially when drenched by the increasingly erratic rains, while the lowlands experience intermittent flash floods and droughts. In the western region, several districts like Bulisa, Ntoroko and Kasese are already reeling in the after effects of heavy floods, while central districts including Kampala Central are all susceptible in various degrees. Alfred Okidi, the permanent secretary of the Ministry of Water and Environment, told NTV that these are merely warning signs of climate change taking toll.
The effect varies actually according to the region and also according to the terrain. People in the mountainous areas that we have seen in Elgon, we have seen in Rwenzori, when it rains heavily, you get landslides, mudslides, and the water that runs from those highland areas will have to find its way down. And then this comes to the lowland, like parts of Teso, parts of northern Uganda that you have seen, the Albertine. It now translates into floods.
Okidi said the situation is most worrying in mountainous areas in the east and southwest.
There are actually models that have been done for Uganda, and it shows, especially in the mountainous areas, one of the intensity that we're going to see is increase in rainfall. And I think we have seen it around Mount Elgon, we have seen it in the Rwenzori, the Kisoro, the highland areas. There is quite a bit of increase in the amount of rainfall. And this also actually goes in the same direction as pointed out by the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, which simply put it, wet gets wetter and dry gets drier.
He revealed that the government is taking the matter seriously.
And the Prime Minister therefore put up a technical committee that is going around the country to do the assessment and come up with proposals that is going to be tabled before Cabinet of how to handle drought or rather flood in the short term, in the medium term, and in the long term.
In his New Year message last December, President Museveni described environmental degradation as Uganda's biggest problem.
The issue of the disasters, landslides, floods, etc. Yes, there was heavy rain. However, the bigger problem is the disrespect for the environment.
The president has also variously preached against wetland reclamation and deforestation, only for the investors he praises often to set up factories in the same locations. As he canvasses for votes for a sixth term in office to extend his rule to 40 years, the ruling party describes environment and the rising climate change as one of its unfinished businesses. Hence, the party promises to focus on restoration, protection and demarcation of critical ecosystems such as wetlands and forest reserves, and embark on building a sustainable green economy. His challenger, Muntu, is also promising to increase environment conservation, plant 40 million trees over the next 5 years, and protect water sources, lakes, rivers, swamps, and water catchment areas. Kyagulanyi's NUP details in their manifesto that donors fund 54% of the water and environment sector budget with 825 billion shillings, while government only sinks in 448 billion shillings, which they say they wish to change if elected. FDC, in their yet-to-be-released manifesto, pledges to, among others, introduce a greening Uganda policy, employ an army of youth in every district to plant at least 2 million trees per year, and scrap taxes on liquefied petroleum gas to promote transition by an additional 30% of charcoal users to gas. Regardless of the candidates' policy prescriptions, what is true is that the country is in need of a radical overhaul in regard to dealing with the natural ecosystem and in light of the looming climatic disasters. Not so long ago, Lake Victoria water levels swelled to unprecedented levels since 1964, submerging villages in Uganda, Kenya and Tanzania, mainly as a result of above normal rains and expansive destruction in its catchment area, swamps and forests that ordinarily suck up the flow to the lake. The overflow of the lake further led to the bursting of rivers draining the lake, including River Nile, triggering more flooding and hence damage upstream, according to the Lake Victoria Basin Commission, the regional body on management of the lake in Kisumu, Kenya. Meanwhile, wetland coverage in the country, according to available records, dropped from 15% in 1994 to 13% in 2015, with 50% of permanent losses recorded in Lake Choga and Lake Victoria basins alone, while 31% of the remaining wetlands countrywide are degraded. Almost half of the degradation, or 46%, happened in eastern Uganda, of which 55% happened in Lake Choga drainage basin. Likewise, forest cover, mainly as a result of deforestation, declined from 24% in 1990 to 11% in 2015. The forest coverage in the country is now at 9%, and only 12% is under strict nature reserve. Yet, all available studies detail that if the degradation of the ecosystem persists at the current trend, the country is yet to see the worst. The United Nations Development Programme resident representative Elsie Atafwa told NTV that the conservation on environment and climate change needs to be broadened.
It's really a local thing and we have to take action. In Uganda, we have in the past seen the impact, for example, of drought on poverty, where because of drought in some regions, particularly in the 2016-2017, we saw the impact on vulnerable groups, we saw the impact on poor people. We saw for the first time poverty numbers increasing as a result of climate-induced issues. So overall, I think the interconnection between climate change and issues around development such as agriculture, because where there is climate change, there's impact on agriculture. For example, crops fail, and when crops fail, we have food insecurity. We have the impact of climate on health. For example, where we are seeing that in places where we never saw malaria, we are seeing them for the first time because of warmer temperatures.
And with Uganda heavily relying on nature-based solutions like agriculture and tourism, the future could be bleak.
In many parts of the region in Africa, where our development is hinged on nature-based solutions. In other words, we depend on agriculture, we depend on tourism, we depend on different resources. It's important to pay attention to that subject. And I think clearly now we have seen floods in many parts of the country. We have seen the Nile rising. We have seen the Lake Victoria rising to levels that we have not seen since 1964. And where is that coming from? Part of it, you can say, is climate change.
Previously, Karamoja was described as the most disaster risk zone, but that is changing. Still, a 2008 USAID climate risk profile shows that expansion of warmer regions in Uganda has been mostly affecting the Karamoja region since the 1960s, with increase of average temperature of 1.3 degrees Celsius and an increase in average number of days with extreme heat or hot days of 20 to 28% between 1960 and 2003, with particularly marked increases between June and August. Also, when it rains in the region, it gets ugly in some parts.
In that regard, I mean, the vulnerabilities are different, and I think that we have to pay attention across board in terms of what needs to be done and where the investment needs to come in. So, for example, if you take the Elgon area, where part of the reason is that we have unsustainable land management practices, particularly where you have cultivation on the mountains. Now, how do you then introduce sustainable land management practices to be able to address this? And that's where your investment comes in.
Lately, government is costing climate change interventions across all sectors as one of the ways to act.
All MDAs have been told by the Minister of Finance, and it is a position of government that whatever you do, you need to ensure that you climate-proof your investments, you climate-proof all your infrastructures, so that we do not need to get to a situation whereby we get roads or bridges being washed away.
Uganda is party to the Global Climate Change Response Mechanisms from the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, the main international agreement on climate change reached in 1992 that later gave birth to the Kyoto Protocol signed in 1997 but took effect in 2005, and the Paris Agreement signed in 2015. As a result of these multilateral agreements, Uganda, like other developing countries, were required to develop national adaptation programs of action, proposals on how to mitigate impacts of climate change in order to access climate cash, which is mostly coming through donor agencies like UNDP and World Bank. Uganda developed such programs in 2007 and received its first funding in 2012. Several projects have been implemented since, but like other donor-funded programs, once funding ends, they begin to wither due to sustainability issues. Also, amid its competing priorities like security, as government seeks to embolden its hold on to power, the environment has been pushed to the back burners. In Mbale, one of the most prone areas in the Elgon, the district environment officer, Charles Wekube, said prioritization is further downscaled at local government level.
You see, we are dwelling much on the donors and NGOs. The key challenge that we face is environment is not prioritized at all levels in our country. At the national level, when you look at the budget, you people are good at that, analyzing those things. Just analyze the national budgets for some 3-4 financial years. You'll find the funding to environment is the least. And even at the district here, environment is not prioritized.
It is true we have a limited resource envelope as a country. And as a country, you have to prioritize and go for a step-by-step or a calculated approach. Like government prioritize roads, prioritize energy, education, so that the limited resources were targeted at that. So it is not that that government is not minding about investment in those particular areas.
Overall, the government is doing what it can. Now, it's always that there's room that we can do, all of us can do some more. And I think we don't have to look at it as government. Even the role of the media is important. The fact that you're having this conversation with me, bringing attention to the issue, the magnitude of the issue for the country. And therefore, I would say that we can all do more.
In 2015, a government-commissioned study warned that Uganda will need to carefully manage the impact of climate change as average temperatures are expected to rise, the threshold set in the UN Paris Climate Change Agreement over the next 50 years, which means severity in calamities from floods to droughts. The same study detailed that the country will incur losses between 3 to 6 billion US dollars or 11 to 22 trillion Uganda shillings annually in the energy, agriculture, transport and water sectors alone by 2025, which raises big question marks on the country's readiness to adapt.
The issue of sustainability is a very important one. I think if we design a project and we leave and the project falls through and people don't follow the lessons and the experiences and the outcomes, then we have failed. So there are a couple of ways to look at it. I think the most important thing is how climate-related issues are mainstreamed or integrated across board, okay? So whether you're in the Ministry of Agriculture, Ministry of Health, Ministry of Energy, Tourism and others, it should be one of the things that we are filtering our work through the climate lens.
James Muhindo, the Resilience and Climate Change Coordinator at Oxfam, explained that more needs to be done to enlighten especially the at-risk population.
If you look at a community like Karamoja, for over 40 years, over 50 years, has been depending on food aid. Just because the community is there, cannot be able to produce. Of course, there are so many factors. One will say that possibly because Karamoja has for a long time been engaging in cattle rustling and raiding, possibly that's what they looked at as their economic activity. But there are other factors like the weather conditions, which do not favor cultivation and cropping systems in Karamoja. And so, building capacity of those people in those communities, investing in intervention, simple intervention like water for irrigation, for instance, for a community like Karamoja.
Muhindo said the National Climate Change Bill, currently before Parliament, will go a long way in dealing with some of the issues at hand.
Looking through the drafts document of the bill that the Climate Change Department has been able to share with civil society agencies and citizens of the country to review, it is of good intention. The bill is of good intention, but we realized there are gaps that we needed to work on. We seemed to have picked articles from the different other bills that are existing within the region to come up with our bill. And so what we are saying is that we need to localize this climate change bill. Can we be able to involve the citizens of the country to be able to contribute the principles of the bill?
Uganda, like everywhere around the globe, is suffering from different stress levels of climate change patterns like floods, landslides, droughts, increased crop failure as a result of changing farming seasons and drug-resistant pests attacking crops and a surge in non-communicable diseases like malaria. Such development challenges are not so much pronounced in political manifestos, especially in Africa, ostensibly given the many pressing challenges at hand. But like many developing countries with countless urgent problems to deal with, the discourse on the environment will always be pushed to the fringes.